So good morning and welcome to the Centro de Ciencias Humanas y Sociales of the CSIC in Madrid. We are going to, my name is Eduardo Manzano, I am the director of the Centro de Ciencias Humanas y Sociales. And first of all, I'm going to give the words to my colleague Pilar Martín, who is one of the organizers of this conference.
Okay, thank you, Eduardo. I just want to say welcome to everybody. We are pleased to have you here to participate and share experience in this Eurospec SpecNet meeting, which is hosted by our center, the Center for Human and Social Science of the Spanish National Research Council. Thank you very much for coming. We are especially thankful for those of you that have traveled long distance. I hope the jet lag is not affecting you too much, so you can actively participate in this meeting and also enjoy your stay in Madrid in spite of the hot wave. The main objective of this meeting is to promote scientific collaboration and networking activities in order to contribute to build up a global spectral flux sampling network. As you know, the estimate of carbon sequestration by terrestrial ecosystem and the prediction of global change on the ecosystem carbon balance are becoming urgent needs required by international agreements. To support this estimation, a deep knowledge of those processes that regulate carbon exchange between terrestrial ecosystems and the atmosphere is fundamental, and the long-term and globally consistent observation systems are pretty much required. The linkage of ecosystem fluxes measured with the covariance systems in the framework of international networks such as FluxNet, and the acquisition of proximal and remote sensing optical and thermal data is foreseen as the most promising method for scaling up surface fluxes, overcoming the spatial coverage limitation of the eddy covariance systems. We are honored to count in this meeting with the participation of STEAM specialists in the field of carbon modeling, proximal and remote sensing, for vegetation monitoring, and also in data management and exchange. I'm sure they will share their research experience through relevant keynote lectures that I'm sure will bring up key issues as those related with best practice and comparability issues. Eurospec working group, which Manuela and myself coordinates, is especially focused in that best practice and comparability issues, so we expect that this meeting will serve to make progress in this field. Well, before I pass the floor to Eduardo again, I will again welcome everyone. I encourage all of you to actively participate in the discussions over these next 2 days and also during the field trip. So I'm sure that if you do it, we will have a successful and very fruitful meeting. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Pilar. I'll be very brief. Well, first of all, just a quick word on what we are, on where we are. This is the Centro de Ciencias Humanas y Sociales, which belongs to the Consejo Superior de Investigaciones Científicas. You know, we like very long names in Spain. The Consejo Superior de Investigaciones Científicas is the High Council for Scientific Research, which is in Spain, which is the largest Spanish organization dealing with research, basically. It's a public institution, and it's the equivalent in Spain of what it's in France, the CNRS, or in Germany, the Max Planck Gesellschaft, more or less. There is nothing quite similar to the CSIC in the Anglo-Saxon academia. So we are basically an institution which deals with research. Now, this institution is quite large, and it comprises a number of many different disciplines and areas, from biology to a study of physics or astrophysics, and also humanities and social sciences. Now, most of all the disciplines dealing with humanities and social sciences are located at this building, in this very peculiar area in Madrid. You know, this is a huge center, as you can see. Here work about 700 people, and again, we have very very large number of people working in different disciplines, from philosophy to history, from linguistics to sociology. Now, at this moment, probably you will not be, well, all these problems, at this moment we have this, this juncture, we are at the juncture in which we need to define many different fields and many different disciplines. And one of the fields that are being defined in the humanities is the concepts of, the global humanities. As you know, the humanities tend to be disciplines which have clear tendency to fragmentation. I mean, that historians tend to concentrate on particular periods, on particular times, and particular areas, or the same goes with sociologists, or the same goes with people working on linguistics. Now, the trend these days is basically that humanities should go more global. And why? Is because humanities, which deal basically with what makes us humans and why we are humans and how we are humans and these sorts of things. The reason is that the humanities have to tackle very complex issues these days. We are facing increasing challenges. And one of the challenges that we are facing these days is the challenge of climate change that Pilar rightly mentioned. Now, I don't know if you're aware of the fact that geologists are just on the brink of changing the geological era where we are living. We are 1 or 2 years' time. We are expecting a formal declaration of a change of geological era, in which we will be leaving the so-called Holocene, and we will be entering in what is being called the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene meaning an era, a geological era, in which our planet, in which the driving force, or the main driving force of change in our planet will be the human action. Now, this poses a formidable challenge to research, because we will need to know how human action is affecting the planet. And here is where humanities, social sciences tend to have to more or less work with disciplines that with which we have not traditionally worked with. And this is something that we'll need to address in one way or another. And we will have to look at the history of human action on the environment, at the reasons of the human action on the environment, at the ways in which the human actions and the environment are carried out. Now, for this will be absolutely necessary in this new era, in this new era of research. We will need to collaborate, and we will need to have global networks, and we will need to try to put things together. And this, again, will bring us to more global science. So this is why the this meeting of Eurospec and SpecNet is so timely, because we really think that data, that methodologies, and that new perspectives have to be put together and somehow have to be discussed in a global framework. So that's why we are so grateful for all of you to have come here to share your knowledge with us, to try to adjust research agendas and try to adjust methodologies with both sides of the Mediterranean. And in this connection, I would like to thank Pilar Martín for having taken all the trouble to make this conference, to organize this conference. This is something which is more necessary now than ever. The Euro research area, the European research area, has to work very closely with the American research area. This is something that we are that I am totally convinced at this moment at the level of the humanities is very, that's very clear, and particularly in matters which have to do with the study of the environment. So this is why we are so pleased to have and to host this meeting, and I hope really that you are able to make yourself understandable to each other, to try to make things in common, to put things in common, because we do really need these new perspectives in research. So that's it for me, and I would like you to leave the floor open for the specialists and just to start the meeting. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eduardo. I just want, before passing the floor to Loris Vescova, which is the coordinator of the Eurospec network, and he's going to give us an overview of this network and the future activities. I would like just to give some practical information. In the folder that we gave you, you have some practical info, such as the information about lunches and meals and the social dinner. And also you have the info for the connection with the Wi-Fi internet connection. So if you have any problem with that, just tell us. And just an announcement for those of you that are going to attend the field trip on Friday. The organization will cover the bus cost, but you have to pay for the lunch. So we have made an arrangement with the restaurants in Monfragüe National Park that we will visit after visiting the Flashnet tower. So you have to pay 10 euros for this lunch before the field trip. So just in the registration desk, you can pay today or tomorrow for this lunch for the field trip. And I think that's all. I encourage all the speakers to adapt to the time that we have allocated for each presentation, so we can go through the agenda without any problems. So now Loris will give the first presentation of this meeting about the Eurospec activities.
So thank you everybody for coming. I would like, first of all, to thank you, the director, Eduardo Manzano, and thank him for hosting us in these beautiful facilities. Of course, thanks to Pilar and Manuela, the Working Group 1 coordinators, who have been working a lot to organize this meeting, and also to Javier Pacheco, who has been dealing with logistics, basically. Of course, thanks to John for coming over and struggling with the jet lag to be here with us today. I'm just going to give a general presentation on Eurospec, which is a cost action. I see some new faces, so I'm going to spend a few words on what a cost action is and what it is for. As you see in the slide, it's a network of people who are working with spectral, optical sampling and fluxes. It's a network who was started in 2000, by the end of 2009, 2010, and it's been growing. So the project is open and anybody can join at any time. So if you think that you would get some benefit and you would like to work together and collaborate with us, just get in contact with us, and then you can be included in our network. So just a few words about COST is a European Cooperation in Science and Technology. It's a European framework supporting cooperation amongst scientists and researchers across Europe. As you can see, there are different domains in different disciplines, and our cost action is included in this domain: Earth System Science and Environmental Management. Our cost action code, let's say, it's ES0903, but we are known as the Eurospec Cost Action. It started, as I said before, in January 2010, and it will last until January 2014. So, as I said, when we started, actually, the idea of starting a cost action came from a SpecNet meeting where John was actually reminding us how important it is to get some funding to carry out all these networking activities. So we tried to see whether there was a correct and appropriate framework in Europe, and so we found that it was possible to present this proposal. And the first people who started writing this proposal were actually SpecNet members from Europe, including our group and Lund University Group, Pilar, people from Milan. So, and as I said, then we've been growing over time. That's our website with a map of probably 22 European countries plus other countries, Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, and recently Canada joined this network. So what is the scientific aim of our cost action? Basically, as I said before, we are a group of people who are running, we are carrying out spectral measurements, but we are using different instruments, different methods, different protocols. So our first aim is to try to standardize these spectral measurements as much as possible. And of course, to promote the use of these optical sensors to monitor biophysical parameters and especially carbon fluxes on a continuous basis. So basically, we want to promote the use of sensors installed on towers to continuously monitor reflectance. And another important objective is to stimulate the collaboration between different science communities. The community of people who are dealing with spectrometers in the field and taking spectral measurements, the remote sensing community, and the community of people who are collecting eddy covariance data, so carbon flux and data. So just a quick overview of what COST can do. For those who are not familiar with COST, we can organize meetings, conferences, and workshops, and cover travel and accommodation for the participants. Another important tool in the COST actions is represented by the short-term scientific missions, which are open to everybody in Europe. So one researcher from a European lab can visit another European lab for a period, a minimum period of 1 week up to 3 months. And also EU researchers can travel overseas to the overseas countries I mentioned before. One of our main objectives is also training. So last year we organized our first training school, the summer school on optical sampling in Italy, on Monte Bondone, in July 2011. This year we are organizing another summer school in collaboration with Reflex, and this summer school is going to be carried out by the end of July this year. But maybe some people involved with Reflex will talk a little bit more about this initiative later on. And another important funding source is related to the possibility of writing joint publications, reports, or books, basically. And this is happening throughout the action. as it concerns the joint publications in general, but we are probably going to think about publishing a book or a report about the SpecNet activities by the end of the action. So we are organized into 4 working groups. The first working group who actually organized this meeting is the networking working group. The second working group is focusing on intercomparison of different instruments, different methods, different protocols. The working group 3 is focusing on the use of upgraded instruments for continuous flux measurements, and the working group 4 is more focused on upscaling. So, as I said, this is a working group 1 meeting coordinated by Pilar and Manuela, and is focusing on reviewing the state of the art of optical sampling networks. This was one of our main tasks during the action: data sharing and networking. I'm not going to talk, I'm going to skip some slides now because I'm not going to talk about this, because Pilar will give a presentation about the working group, past, current and future activities just after my presentation. So I'm just going to skip some slides, and I'll just skip to the working group 2. There will be a presentation about an intercomparison experiment later on. So the main focus of this working group is intercalibration of instruments and comparison of different methods and protocols. As I said before, there's a lot of people out there taking measurements using different instruments and different methods. Here you can see John Gammon taking measurements with his tram in the grassland, is it Lethbridge? Yeah, in Lethbridge. And some other students taking measurements with the GER system at Monte Bondone. So we all use different instruments, and Javier will also show that these instruments are actually comparable, but there are some differences when it comes to direct comparison of their spectral response. But we use different methods. We use wide targets. We use a cosine receptor to correct and to get reflectance. And some of us is also actually dealing with hemispherical reflectance, so it's taking measurements with a cosine receptor pointing upwards and downwards. So talking about the last activities and the future activities we are going to carry out within the Working Group 2 framework, we ran this intercomparison experiment at Monte Bondone last year during the summer school, and Javier Pacheco is going to report on this experiment, which was using 4 hyperspectral spectrometers, which were compared, and there were interesting results after this experiment, which Javier will show later. After this meeting, we met in Bournemouth to discuss the first results of the experiment, and last month we met up in Brussels, and there was a joint Working Group 2 and 3 event with the industries working on building these instruments and selling these instruments, which was focusing on the possibility to upgrade these instruments for according to our needs, and especially to carry out continuous measurements out in the field at the covariance sites. Last month we were also thinking about a possible experiment intercomparison experiment, but in this case we will use multispectral instruments. And this experiment is probably going to be carried out by the end of the year at the NERC facilities in the UK. So I'm going to skip this slide just to show you a couple of pictures of our experiment at Monte Bondone. The 4 systems we used were ASD, Ocean Optics, and Unispec PP systems. So the third working group is focusing on the use of these sensors for continuous measurements, and the activities carried out in this group aim basically at recommending a standard instrument or a number of instruments to be used in the ICOS network. Arnaud Carrara, just after my presentation, will talk about the ICOS infrastructure, which is going to run in Europe for the next 20 years. So it's a long-term infrastructure. And ICOS is planning to install spectral sensors. It's planning to install a number of sensors, standard sensors on the electrovariance towers, but also spectral measurements will be carried out. So what we've been doing in our cost is trying to give some recommendations to ICOS and provide technical documents on the type of instruments, the setup of these instruments, and the protocols and things like that. So as I said, we met in Brussels with the industries last month. Several industries participated to this meeting. I will talk about the outcomes of this meeting in a presentation I will give in an hour or so, or maybe after the coffee break. There has been a positive discussion on the science need versus the industry's needs. They need to be sure about a possible market to upgrade and to put some efforts on upgrading and designing an upgraded instrument. The main outcome of this meeting is that we got the impression that we need actually hyperspectral systems which are ready to use by the community rather than just instrument prototypes. Because when this network will kind of expand, also people who are not specialists on spectral measurements will probably join. So we need ready-to-use, let's say, instruments. There will be another working group 3 meeting in the near future, and also we will prepare more detailed technical document which will be delivered to ICOS. This is just it's been taken by this document we are going to deliver, but I'm going to talk about this in the next slide. The working group 4 is focusing on upscaling, and basically there's a biogeochemical models community whose aim is to assimilate high-frequency time series of radiometric data into models. And there's a remote sensing community. I see now the coordinator of the working group 4 just entered the room, Enrico Tomelleri. So the questions Enrico Tomelleri is going to answer, the scientific questions, is what is the temporal resolution we need within these models, the temporal resolution of spectral data and the spatial resolution, and how we can couple proximal sensing and remote sensing in a sort of upscaling exercise. So working group 4 met in Jena, last year, and the next meeting of Working Group 4 is going to be held in Innsbruck in Austria by the end of October this year. So if you are interested in joining this meeting, please contact Enrico. I mentioned before the fact that we ran this summer school at Monte Bondone last year. There was some training carried out by Alasdair MacArthur, coming from the NERD field spectroscopy facility. And there was also an airborne measurement workshop carried out by Edinburgh researchers and CNR lecturers. I mentioned the intercomparison exercise, but we carried out an hyperspectral flight campaign, and we managed to get 4 good images, ISA Eagle hyperspectral images, over 4 eddy covariance towers. So that's more or less the Monte Bondone area where we flew these instruments and the flight lines. These are some areas where we put these ground targets to correct these images. So Alasdair MacArthur in the last months has been working on this imagery correction, and so these images are now available. This is one of these 4 images, and they will be available for Working Group 4 members and in general for the Eurospec members to test them and to check whether these images can be useful for an upscaling exercise within the Working Group 4 framework. So I mentioned 4 towers before, but there were actually 5 towers. And so, as I said, the spectral data have been, the hyperspectral imagery have been corrected, and the eddy covariance data are going to be available soon. The Professor Pitacco from Padua University is actually carrying out this work. So I think that we will upload this data on our website, and they will be available to the community and especially to the Working Group 4 members. Future plans of Eurospec. We need to provide a more advanced technical document and some detailed protocols to ICOS, and Working Group 1 and 2 and 3 will be responsible for this. We need to sort of come up with a sensor selection, so a number of hyperspectral systems, let's say, will have to be specified and recommended. We need to do some work on calibrations and calibration protocols in particular. We need to work more on sensors upgrading together with the industries, as I said before, to improve these instruments to be used at the eddy covariance towers. Working Group 4 will be, as I said before, focused on the integration of spectral data into biogeochemical models. And also we have started thinking about the final conference, the Eurospec final conference, which might be a final event together with other communities such as, for instance, Specnet, Fluxnet, and ICOS. And this event will be organized by the end of 2013, basically. So that's a picture from the funny picture from taken during the summer school, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Loris. I'm just going to present some slides to give you an overview of the working group activities that Manuela and myself coordinates, as Loris said. Okay. Well, this is this meeting is a working group 1 meeting because we in this working group deal basically with networking activities, and these are our main objectives within this working group. First of all, to study the state of the art of the optical sampling. We have been working on that for the first 3 years of the Cost Action, and also we are working in the protocol definition and recommendations. So we have been exploring the different networks dealing with flux measurements and the combination of flux measurement with optical measurements. Here you have an historical overview of all of these networks. From Carbono Europe, there are measurements, optical measurements included in these FluxNet networks, and now we are basically working in collaboration with ICOS to propose or to recommend spectral measurements, protocols, and instruments to be used within the network. We have produced some deliverables from the working group. The first one was a review of the nature and quality of 16 optical measurements in Europe that was made through a field survey, which was made in collaboration with the Eurospec members, and we produced a paper which has been published in 2011 in the Sensors journal. So this is the survey was 34 sites answered the online survey. Of these, most of these were taking optical measurements and collecting this optical data. The majority of the groups that answered the survey declared to have experience in optical sampling at different levels, leaf and canopy levels. And more than half knew about the activities of the SpecNet network, but only 3 sites were directly involved in that network. So we need still work in the integration of our activities in these international networks. Well, this is some example of this paper that was published in Sensor. This is another view of the different instruments that were analyzed in this paper. The question that we include in the survey were about the instruments that were used in the different sites, which were the manufacturers, what was being measured in each site, which method was used, and which products were generated in each site. The main results of this survey, which are included in this paper that I mentioned in Sensor, is that the instrument selection for optical sampling has been typically performed on ad hoc basis by individual groups working at only a few flux tower sites. So there is not really integration of protocols and instruments at the European level. So as a result, spectral measurements protocol are different from site to site, and many of them lack traceability to national standard. For this reason, there are limits to their successful application for cross-comparison studies and for scaling up observation at a global scale. So what are our further challenges? At the scale of the edicovariant sites, we need, for example, to define what is the footprint of the optical sampling, what are we measuring, what information can we obtain about the ecosystem processes, how to scale up this information from point measurements to spatial distributed measurements. And also, we need to discuss about if harmonization of sensors, instruments, and protocols is possible. In fact, this is one of the objectives of this meeting, to try to discuss about this possibility, if we can harmonize this instrument and also the protocols that are being used. We also need to know how to compare the different ecosystems, and there is also a question about if the Flux Tower is the best platform for this kind of measurements. We have here another key issues. For example, a spatially sampled spectral measurement in flux print, which kind of sample we need to have, transect, multi-angular method. There are different possibilities. Which is the better? Is there a best one, or the method will depend on the ecosystem characteristics? Each site is unique, so there is a problem with the BRDF that we need to solve. And the reflectance quantities will vary with atmospheric conditions. So as you see, there is a lot of key issues that we still need to discuss about. What are the current activities of this working group 1? First of all is the assessment of the added value of optical data from the perspective of different user communities. So keep working in these networking activities and see what the user of the, especially of the FluxNet communities need from the optical measurements point of view. And also, as I said, to work in the recommendation for increased harmonization. As Lori said, we are contributing from Working Group 1 and also from Working Group 3 to recommendation on optical measures within the ICOS program. Well, in this session, we will work, in this meeting, we will work also in other working group activities, which is the enlargement of the European network. We need to discuss about data sharing policies and how to storage and access the data, especially talking about the integration of flux data and optical data. This discussion started in previous Eurospec and SpecNet meetings, one in California and Berkeley in last year, and another one in Florence in Italy in December 2011. And we will continue working in that discussion about data management, data sharing, and accessibility in this meeting. Also, thinking about the main objectives of our working group, we have defined this agenda with the idea of talking about this best practice and harmonization in the different levels of information that we manage within this kind of activities. So in the first day, we will talk basically about spectral data collection and field protocols, but all the presentations will be related with this harmonization and best practice activities. And in the second day, we will talk basically about data management and exchange. And we will have a special working session, which is open to not only to the Eurospec members and SpecNet members, but to any of the attendants. In this working session, we want to have an interactive discussion on data management and exchange, and see which are the user requirements and which exchange mechanisms we can use to have all the information we are producing being usable for all the people who is working actually in this flux and optical measurement. Finally, on Friday, we will have a field trip to Las Majadas del Tietar FluxNet site, which is being coordinated by the CEAM group. Arnaud is going to talk about the measurements that are being taken there today. And finally, we will go to Monfragüe National Park, which is a very good example of the Mediterranean forest. And well, I think it's pretty much what I wanted to say. I just want to announce that the presentation by Arnaud about the Eurospec ICOS interaction will be moved to tomorrow. Will be the first talk in the session 4 after lunch. Okay, so now I pass the floor to John Gammon that will give us an overview about the SpecNet network. Yeah, I think it's not to close it. Okay. You can use this to pass if you want.
Okay. Well, thank you, Pilar. Can everybody see the screen from where you are? Okay, well, you have lots of them. Okay, it's kind of small up here. So yeah, find a good spot, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think this is a very exciting meeting, and the Cost Action, this Eurospec group, is making a lot of good progress that has been needed in this area. I wanted to talk a little bit about the background of some of these ideas. As Loris mentioned, you know, he was an early participant in SpecNet, and I think Eurospec, this cost action, is actually realizing a lot of the objectives that were laid out in SpecNet. I would say much better than we were able to do in SpecNet. And there's some good reasons why this is a challenge. This is a difficult challenge, which, like most important challenges, I think are difficult. But the payoff, the opportunities are very large. So I think it's very exciting to see what's happening in the European community here. In my talk, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the history of SpecNet, sort of what are some of the themes that we've dealt with in SpecNet, current activities, and what are some of the future plans. And this picture, by the way, is one of the SpecNet sites in Canada, and I like it because the rainbow reminds us of what we're really measuring here. We're measuring electromagnetic radiation and how it interacts with matter. Usually we're looking at the surface, but you know, you can see that interaction in this picture as well. And if you look carefully, it's a double rainbow. Sometimes you see triple rainbows. Amazing rainbows over the boreal forest in Canada, sometimes in summer. So this is the Western Peatland site. You might be familiar with that. It's been in the literature as a Canadian Carbon Program site for many years. Larry Flanagan did some work there. Unfortunately, the Canadian Carbon Program has died. So one of the messages I want to give you is that, I want to leave us with, is that we have to think about how do we transcend politics in the life of grants, because these things come and go, but our ideas are better and bigger than that, and we need to think about how to keep these ideas alive past individual funding programs. So a little bit of history here. About 10 years ago, we had our first working group. We wrote a proposal, and then our first working group was in 2003. And this was at the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis at Santa Barbara. We had a series of meetings. Loris was an early participant, as I said. And very quickly, he picked up on this idea and held a meeting in Monte Bardone in 2008, sort of the ground of, you know, the beginnings of the formation of the cost effort. And there's been a series of meetings. Some of you might have been at the Berkeley meeting last year where we tried to integrate with FluxNet, and this has really been a long-term goal, is to really integrate the optical sampling more explicitly with the Flux community. And this meeting here I added at the bottom, so here we are in blue. In addition to these meetings that have a SpecNet theme, might be Eurospec or some other thing, there are other meetings that happen more informally. For example, we've been using AGU and Ecological Society of America as a chance to meet and have working meetings, planning meetings and things like that. Also, it's interesting that other parts of the world, people are starting to do similar things. So, for example, Andreas Huni and I just came back from a meeting in Brisbane, Australia, by the Australian Centre for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, where Tim Malthus led that meeting, and it was on bio-optical data. So some of the very same things we're discussing here were being discussed in Australia. So one of the challenges is, how do we transcend our political boundaries and put together something that is truly universal? Can we do that? And if we can, I think the kind of integration that Eduardo was talking about in the humanities, this globalization, we need to think about how do we do that within our own efforts as well. And I think we see the beginnings of that here in this meeting. So there's been a bunch of papers that describe SpecNet. The first one was part of a special issue in Remote Sensing of Environment. Some of you may be familiar with that. You can read about some of the history of these ideas in these papers. Some of these, I think, are posted on the SpecNet website, which is here. And this is a bit out of date, but it shows you some of the field sites that have registered. I want to encourage any of you who have field measurements to go to the website and register or join the mailing list. It's a place where you can go to see who's doing what in one sort of central place. So we need to get more of the European sites up here. By the way, Pilar, I was talking to Danette Thayer about making sure your sites are up here, because for some reason we failed to get that up here, and we're working on putting that up. But this really emphasizes, if you go to the website, it describes that SpecNet is really emphasizing links to flux measurements. So it's really modeled after the FluxNet effort right from the beginning. What can we add by adding optical data and proximal optical sensing in some systematic way? And how can that help upscaling to remote sensing? That's always been a core goal of SpecNet. The idea of data sharing has been a goal. That's been difficult because of the standardization effort, the lack of tools for doing that. And I think you guys are making good progress in that area. That's going to be an important part of this. So also satellite validation, that's a really key thing, having measurements on the ground to independently measure what we're trying to measure from satellite. So there's multiple functions being served here. Anyway, I'd like to encourage you to visit the site, and it's only as good as the community who uses it. It's a volunteer effort. We don't have any current funding for SpecNet, although that's something I'll talk about at the end. And your ideas can contribute to this larger effort. And I view this as sort of a forum that can stitch together some of the different efforts around the world, a single place you can go to find out about Eurospec or what the Australians are doing, other things in this area, sort of analogous to FluxNet. Some of the themes, again, surface atmosphere fluxes, linking to FluxNet type measurements, that's always been there. Phenology is a nice one that pops out if you have continuous optical measurements. They're beautiful tools for monitoring phenology of a certain type, optical phenology. There's a lot of research going on now with biodiversity and species composition, very interesting, and canopy biochemistry and stuff. So that's another area that people are doing work. But just in general, ecological states and processes, there's all kinds of questions that can be addressed with these technologies. And then in addition to these direct applications, there's the validation of satellite data. So these historically have been some of the common SpecNet themes, and you'll recognize these as your own themes here in Eurospec. So this is sort of my cartoon version of the universe that we live in the SpecNet world, and you'll see some familiar technologies here, and they're listed on the left. Some of these are flux measurements, whether we're talking about chamber measurements or eddy covariance on the left, different scales. Of course, it's hard to measure gas exchange at many scales. One of the limitations of, say, chamber methods is they're not that scalable. Eddy covariance is sort of the gold standard, of course, and so that's always been a central focus. So we're really talking about a whole range of field optical sampling, everything from the leaf to whole ecosystem scales, and you can see some methods here that are illustrating optical sampling methods that can measure within the footprint of the flux tower, and as we've heard, defining that footprint for optical sampling is a key challenge. Then there's a sort of more traditional remote sensing, anything from a distance we would call remote sensing, but collectively we're really talking about a wide range of optical sampling techniques. So this is alphabet soup, this is apples and oranges, this is a very complex world of many different sensors, and it's a big challenge to talk about standardization and intercomparison, and this is the challenge that we face given so many different types of optical sensors. So I'm going to summarize a view of this, which is we've sort of already heard and seen some examples, but for my talk I broke this down into sort of 3 levels. The SpecNet world, people within the SpecNet community all around the world tend to use these 3 or some combination, or individually they might use only one depending on their budget, and these do map onto different budgets. So some people use very simple solutions, some people use field spectrometers, which are sort of the gold standard for this community. We do need gold standards. And then we're seeing the emergence of imaging spectrometers that are fairly low cost and accessible to this community. So this is the world we live in. Just some examples of field sensors being applied. You know, PRI sensors, Thomas Hilker is using this in a field site. This is Jan Grelrue has developed NDVI sensors from LED sensors. For a few dollars, a few euros, you could make or buy something like this. These are cheap. Here's sensors that cost a few $100s that can measure an NDVI, automated continuously with a weather station in the footprint of a flux tower. So in this case, we're setting it up on a separate platform than the flux tower. So to summarize a few things, these are relatively inexpensive and they're easily automated, which helps us with the time domain. We can measure in time continuously. But they have some real disadvantage. Spectrally, their bands are poorly defined. The manufacturers can't tell you that this is something you have to figure out as a user. The sampling geometry is often poorly defined, and it's really difficult to know what you're actually measuring with these sensors. So there's really strong advantages and strong disadvantages. I'd say because of the cost, people are using these, and they're networking. So large amounts of these sensors are being applied all over the world, and the question is, what do we do with these, and how do we compare these data? It's a big challenge. Now, here's more of the gold standard, field spectrometers. You guys are settling on a few, which is good. I think the idea of identifying some instruments to use is a really good idea. There's some challenges to doing that, partly because the technology changes all the time. But here's a Unispec. Here's a spectral evolution instrument like the GER, just a newer version. Here's a Unispec being applied at the leaf level. So same detector can be used completely different ways. So we have these are more expensive. They have many spectral bands, and they can be well calibrated. But lots of sampling geometries are possible. So there's a complexity with all the sampling geometries shown in this picture. How do you standardize on that? There's other issues too. If you look at Scott here, he's holding it and with a red shirt. And I was at a meeting a couple weeks ago where somebody quantified the error of holding an instrument like that depending on the color of your shirt. And it's easily 10 or 20% of the reflectance is screwed up by that. So we have to systematically think about these kinds of errors in our data if we're going to start comparing data. So we can automate these things. So we saw some examples of automated field spectrometer in the previous talks, the TRAM system, Thomas Hilker's AmSpec system. This starts to get more expensive. So you see there's more euros being added on to this. Of course, the many spectral bands, they can be well calibrated spectrally. Again, many sampling geometries. You see different sampling geometries here. Here's a nadir view. Here's multi-angle. Gets complicated. Also, with this, particularly with tower-mounted systems, how do you get back to an absolute reflectance? Really what these things report are an approximate or relative reflectance, and that's not the same as an absolute reflectance. So if we're going to start being a community that compares our data, this method will not compare easily to, say, this method. At least with this method, we can easily put a panel under it. It's harder to do that here. So there's a big challenge that needs to be solved in terms of how to get to that level of data reporting for these types of systems. That's work in progress. And then, of course, the imaging spectrometers. There's a whole fleet of relatively inexpensive technologies out there. Here's an imaging spectrometer the size of a small camera. Here it is again, mounted on a helicopter, mounted on a tram system, and it gives you these images where each pixel is a full spectrum. And this is an example of the head wall sensor, which is one that we're using, but we saw an example in the previous talk. There's a lot of options here. So again, these are more expensive still, so we add some more euros to this. And the expense is not so much the instrument. They're cheaper than an ASD, but one of the gold standard field spectrometers. But it's just the cost of all the flying, the pilot, the gasoline, the fuel, operating the plane, and all the correction of the data, the time that it takes to do all that work. So calibration and getting to absolute reflectance are rather difficult. So how do we compare this to what we measure on the ground is a huge challenge. So I'm sorry if I'm repeating some themes, but these are really important things to remember as we try to standardize and pull together solutions. So I just, I love this meeting because Loris organized this meeting at Monte Bondone, and I think we had a very simple notion that we would just come and measure things and we would solve these problems. And I think what we learned was how hard it is to come and measure things and solve this problem of intercomparison. And I think what we've seen since then is a really good, a series of solutions emerging to these challenges. You guys have been rising to the challenge with your meetings, and that's great. You guys are, I think, really leading a lot of the efforts around the world in terms of intercomparison. I've summarized some of these issues that I've been discussing in this table. We want sensor standardization because it's going to facilitate comparisons, and that's what we want to get this global solution. But we are forced by budget and other reasons to have a diversity of sensors. The community, you can't force a community into standards. It's like herding cats. And scientists are going to do what their budget affords, and scientists who aren't in Eurospec are not necessarily going to follow your standards. They may not have any reason to do that, or they may not be able to afford it, or they may have another idea. So there's going to be sensor diversity out there, and that makes a challenge to this comparison effort. There's also good reasons why you don't want to standardize, and some of those are shown here. When you set a standard, you're setting a standard on a technology that tends to become outdated, and so remember, technology is a moving target. So if you allow for that and keep up with that, then you're going to be fostering innovation, which is part of what we need. So I'd say within the SpecNet community as a whole, we kind of have given up on this, but really encourage the innovation, which makes a harder challenge for intercomparison. So this is really one of the big challenges we face, pulling it all together given this diversity. And also, if you standardize, you're locking in a technology which is not the cheapest technology, because there's always something else coming along that's better and cheaper. So, you can have cheaper solutions by not standardizing, but you really lose a lot at the same time. So these are the trade-offs that have been discussed at SpecNet meetings for the last several years. And I like to think of this as the top-down approach. Maybe you guys can afford to do the top-down approach because you can say, these are the standards, you can fund people or recommend these things. And if you have central funding, you can accomplish this. If you lack that and the community is just doing it from the bottom up, that really represents this approach on the right. And that's the reality that most of the world lives in. It's kind of more of a grassroots, bottom-up effort. And I think in our data integration and data management, we need to start to think about how do we accommodate all of this. And this is a very difficult data management challenge. So there's this tension, and out of this discussion that we've had in the community, I would say what we're getting is sort of pseudo-standards. We have these evolving pseudo-standards. And it really emphasizes the need to focus on the data management systems, the informatics, the cyber infrastructure. And a key take-home message is it's all about the metadata, because you have to have really rich metadata to be able to handle all of this diversity in a sensible way. So one of my take-home messages really is we have to really think about the protocols for protocols. How do we write a protocol that people can understand? And then how do we make those protocols part of our metadata, and what needs to go into our metadata? Because good searchable metadata is really key to finding the data that exist out there. So to summarize some of the issues I just illustrated here, these are all the issues that have to go into protocols and metadata. This is just a short list, not a comprehensive list, but just some examples. I've shown you examples of, sampling in time and space. We have to define time and space. That's fundamental. Like having a GPS timestamp with everything you do would sure be nice. But sun angle, sensor view angle, canopy structure, sensor foroptics, all of these things interact, and you could call them angular issues or sampling geometry. It gets quite complex, but we need to think about all of that stuff when we make these measurements and when we define our measurements and when we summarize our metadata. And then there's other things like spectral issues, like spectral bandpass or spectral calibration. As I mentioned, a lot of these sensors are very poorly defined. The manufacturers don't always give you the information. So as a community, we have to tackle this whole issue. So I'll skip some of these things because I think it's getting time to the coffee break. So I'm going to try and get through a few things quickly. Just angular, sun angle informations. Many techniques for view angle exist out there. Why is this important? Well, I just want to illustrate, here's NDVI and PRI2 indices that are commonly extracted from these sensors as a function of angle, and you can see here's the method that we're using to do this, and this is backscatter and forward scatter in the principal solar plane. You get a very different NDVI for the same target. This is an agricultural field, depending on slight differences in angular effects. Similarly, PRI is different, and the PRI response is different from the NDVI response. So this isn't universal, but it's particular to the different wave bands and how they interact with the canopy, depending on sun angle and view angle. So this sort of BRDF issue and angular issues, we often don't define it very well, or we live in a limited realm of defining it. Some explicit attention to this, I think, is an example of things we have to do. Thomas Hilker's work is a good illustration of why this is important, and also some possible solutions for dealing with this. So I think there's a bunch of ways to deal with this, but we need to think about these things as an example. Because if you're trying to compare across sites or through the season, sometimes within a day, you can get more difference due to these effects than you can in a season for certain ecosystem types. So what does it mean if you don't correct for this? So that's just a cautionary point. View angles, field of view. I'll skip the details, but I think you're familiar with this question as well. We need to think about this and define it, and most sensors, particularly cheap sensors, are ill-defined. Many band passes. This is actually a satellite example. They have this problem in remote sensing. Each satellite has a different NDVI. Well, guess what? Each of our sensors has a different NDVI. So how do we put these things together? Here's an attempt. This is Saulo Castro in an agricultural field, flux tower, phenology station measuring NDVI, and a gold standard spectrometer measuring bands to measure NDVI. And one of his goals is to try and figure out how do you integrate these different measurements in a coherent way. Using the light use efficiency model as a modeling framework. I'm going to skip the details. I'm assuming you're familiar with this, but if not, we can talk about it later. This is just what the data go into to estimate carbon flux. So the goal here is to estimate a carbon flux, or GPP, from optical measurements using this model. So in the interest of time, I'll just move forward. In a sense, it's like this funnel. We're taking all these different sensors. We're living in this world of many sensors, but we want a product, like we want to know carbon flux or some metric of carbon. So this funnel is actually a model or a modeling framework, but it's also all the calibrations and all the metadata that are required to describe how to put this stuff into a funnel and how to integrate it. So this is sort of your data system in a sense. And what Saulo's doing is he's putting different sensors into a funnel, And they give you very different results. This is NDVI from different sensors measuring, estimating FPAR, the term in the light use efficiency model. So you'd get very different answers, a different answer from each sensor, but with intercalibration, which is actually not that hard to do, with a little attention to how these things measure and how to compare them, you can get very similar answers from the same answer. So a simple intercalibration step is what's going on here. I'm just illustrating that to remind us of one of the things we have to think about. So maybe if we can't standardize perfectly on the sensors, we can use the data management and the metadata tools to achieve what we want to do. That's the take home. And in the end, this shows flux data in black for the growth of an agricultural crop, and the optical model in red. It does a pretty good job of estimating the seasonal course of flux data. And when it rains and the flux tower goes down, the optical sensor still works, and we can use this for gap filling. It's one of the really powerful tools, reasons for using optical sensors is it's another gap filling method. So this is from Salo's work again. I'm going to skip all this stuff and get to the end. Some of this I'll talk about tomorrow. So just to conclude, it's really impossible to have perfect standardization. It's a good goal, and I applaud you guys for doing this. I think this is an important task. But we have to recognize that things evolve, so we're going to have to evolve a little bit as well and allow for some evolution. And you know, best practices, what are they? Well, they're going to evolve with our technology and with our goals. So they depend upon the context, and you know, cheap solutions sometimes can work very well as long as we know what we're doing. Those cheap sensors can give you just as good data sometimes as better sensors, more expensive sensors, provided you've calibrated them properly against your gold standard. So a clever use of technology is what I'm advocating here, because we are limited by budgets. The focus largely has to be on data management, informatics, and cyber infrastructure. So, for example, at the ACES meeting, we came up with the conclusion that Specchio is a really good tool. We should be using that. We don't need to reinvent that. So identifying what things exist and how can we put these pieces together, I think is part of this discussion. But then what else do we need besides the databases themselves? I'll talk about that some more tomorrow. And of course, protocols, calibrations, good metadata, that stuff is critical. We need to think hard about the exact themes of this meeting. They're very important. And in terms of SpecNet, where is it going? We're looking to write a proposal to try and stitch together some of these efforts around the world. And I'm interested in, you know, having your input into this proposal. You know, how do we take Eurospec, what the Australians are doing, and find a way to link these efforts? Because each of us are funded separately, and our funding doesn't allow the globalization that we need to do. Can we do this some other way? Maybe SpecNet can help with that through the creation of a virtual network and a virtual community centered around things like protocols, standards, calibration methods, processing. But data management really is going to be a key part of that, with good metadata for interoperability. So I'll be interested in your contributions to this effort beyond this meeting. And also, we need to think about training. I know you guys are having training sessions. Other people are doing this. Maybe we can share our curricula in these training sessions so that globally people are learning a body of knowledge. What you guys come up with as good training techniques, we can come up with, the Australians can do. So when we have these kinds of training sessions, we're learning from each other. So I would advocate for an electronic curriculum, for example, that we can develop. So these are some ideas of where I think we're headed, and thanks for your attention. Sorry for running over a little. So anyway, thanks for your time.
So I'm Arnaud Carrara from Fondation SEAM in Valencia. Okay, the title is not from this meeting, but the rest of the presentation is totally updated. It's just a mistake. I'm going to talk a bit about ICOS, mostly making some consideration in the perspective of what I heard during these 2 days and the relevant issues. So ICOS is supposed to be a world-class infrastructure with our same goal is to quantify and understand the greenhouse gas fluxes, especially on focus on CO2, methane, and N2O. So the scale and target region is Europe and some key region of interest for Europe. So there are large implications for climate policy, and one also main objective is to have a capability for emission and sink monitoring and verification also on long term. For our concern, ICOS is a distributed observation. The name is Integrated Carbon Observing System. So it's not only carbon, but it's definitively aimed as being integrated. So the two main goals or challenge are that this infrastructure is supposed to be set up for long-term measurement, which means at least 20 years, and with a high level of accuracy and standardization that was not reached by the previous network of comparable, for example, for Flux Tower, which are our concern. The Carbo Europe or the FluxNet network are not standardized enough, and there is therefore a limitation in the use of this data because of this lack of standardization and quality of data that is supposed to be overcome at this step of the ICOS. Also, ICOS has been an idea developed after different European projects, mainly to secure the long-term monitoring, which have been seen that for some experience also as John Gavin mentioned in Canada, that some long-term flux tower measurement were just cut down because there was no any more fundings. So it's also to prevent that kind of things that it have been foreseen that these data are of great importance to understand improving our understanding of carbon cycle, and they are only funded by 3 to 5 year term projects, and it's not convenient at all for guaranteeing really long-term consistent data theory. So the infrastructure element it's a monitoring station network. There are 3 components. In ICOS, there is the atmospheric component, which measures mostly concentration of gases in the air, which have 3 different sub-kind of stations. Let's say the tall tower, which measures continuously, some aircraft profile of the same variables, gas concentration, and also some flash sampling to amplify a little bit the spatial representativeness of the network. For ecosystem, which is a more relevant stuff, it corresponds to what is known today by flux towers. And for oceanics, there is fixed station, more station on also measurement on ship lines. And it will be articulated around central facilities, so there will be one central facility per component, so for each kind of small network, even if the 3 networks are integrated together, but the most integration is within each of these networks, the network of ecosystem flux tower stations, the network of atmospheric station and of oceanic station. And so there is one thematic center for each. There is one central analytical laboratory. The country in the bold are the countries that the central facility will definitively be built in this country. And for oceanic thematic center and carbon portal, these are the candidate country, but it's not yet decided. So to go quickly, there is a list of core variables to be measured at each of these networks. This is a network of atmospheric. This is a network for ecosystems that is foreseen, not the red point, but only the green point. So there is much more variable, what is seen quickly for ecosystem. And there is the one of oceanic. So these are tentative and foreseen networks, not something definitive. The main role of the ICOS central facilities, the thematic center, their main role is the data management, so the collection of data, the quality check of the data, and the instrumentation, research and development. And also to support the station by ensuring spare equipment or some facility or some training for people measuring. The central laboratory will make some calibration, flask analysis or biomass analysis for the ecosystem part, and is also a gas provider. And the headquarters and the carbon portal are for coordination and dissemination, basically. So this is a very quick overall scene. So it have also a story. It came from all of these programs. So there is already, all of this network have a stronger bone, and it's not like a new attempt to make something. It's really to improve something that was existing. So it's quite a robust design, I think, that is, it's not like we are going to test to put everything together. I mean, I think we are going to avoid what was described by Jose Moreno, that the fact, for example, that there was something too ambitious, like NILU project of database, it doesn't work after you remove there, it constructs from place to place, so this kind of stuff will not occur. So now the operational phase is foreseen for 2013. It was foreseen at the beginning, but now it's more look like it's going to be really 2014, even if some part of the network can begin a little bit earlier, but this is more or less the timeline. ICOS, this is kind of a representation quite typical of the spatial and temporal scale of the carbon cycle observation. And ICOS, as you can see, will go from flux tower to flag site, can have a kind of spatial scale from the order of the kilometer or the few hundred meters to the order of 10,000 kilometers for footprint of concentration measurement at remote site. And goes from in the information in temporal scale from hour with the tall tower for concentration and for the aircraft flight, or for 30 minutes to decade, because now we have some tower and measurement which are working for decades. I think the longest in Europe are from 96 for flux tower, so it's already a little bit more than 15 years. So as you can see on this picture, of course, the remote sensing just stay in the middle of that. It's just the natural complement to have some global estimate or product. So there is strong links are foreseen and are already built with the remote sensing community, in particular through the GMES program in Europe. For example, ICOS currently in the frame of FP7 in the space, the last space call, have now in the pipeline a project that is made. It was a little bit on the in situ data validation aspect of the GMES. So there is a little bit of money from Europe for that, and ICOS is already involved in that kind of activity. And it's particularly important, the link with remote sensing, because one of the ICOS overarching goal, especially for the stakeholder, it has been sold like this, is to provide detail. So the scale is discussed, but the order of 10 to 50 kilometers spatial scale, flux map of greenhouse gas flux, starting from CO2, but also for methane, based on ICOS data. So all of this map will be produced not really within ICOS, but will be distributed through ICOS. It's a little bit complex story, but will be produced in any case by data assimilation system. Basically, the idea is to combine currently to have a kind of estimate at a European or regional scale. You have the top-down approach, which is the inverse modeling from atmospheric concentration, which is the typical stuff, and you have the bottom-up, which is the integration by a model like ORCID or whatever from eddy covariance flux tower measurement. So the idea is to constrain both of this approach to have to constrain themselves and to reach better accuracy and also to have an end on what is uncertainty in that product. In that frame of data simulation system, of course, nothing can be done, especially for the bottom-up approach, without a remote sensing product for upscaling. So ICOS and remote sensing are obviously linked at one point or another. Not sure if from the start of the measurement, but at least from the last product integration is clear. There is clear links. So I retook the idea of John Gavin that I found very nice about when you measure. So I changed a little bit. It's not sensor standardization and sensor diversity, but it's measurement method, because I will integrate all the protocol with a sensor, let's say. So ICOS really is not in the side of the bar, because for ICOS to facilitate comparison is really a key criterion that cannot be discussed. Nevertheless, ICOS want to avoid that the technology is being outdated, so it will not really foster innovation, but it will include the innovation. So that's why the ICOS methodology will definitely not be frozen. This is really in the concept in the beginning, because we want to have high quality measurement, so state-of-the-art measurement over 20 years, so you cannot have a frozen technology. So the one main role of the thematic center on the maintenance is more the quality and check of the data and the data flow, but the other big stuff is to develop, test new instrument or new measurement protocol while ensuring the consistency in the time series. It means that you have to overlap some measurement or compare in order that you don't screw the series. But of course, as it was said before, if there is the same cheaper equipment for the same accuracies, then you can increase the number of sensors, or same price and better accuracy, but you have to evolve. So the way it will evolve now is foreseen as once a new method or instrument is adopted after a lot of work and and test by the thematic on proposition of thematic center by the community of the people measuring, and it should be implemented within a 3 years timeline in order that the time of people have time to buy new instrument, whatever. This is a foreseen issue. So ICOS and protocols is a very key issue, because if you want to have standard measurement, all of the talk previous have made the room for that. Standard protocol is obviously a key issue. Especially also since interoperability with other global and large-scale observation is also a key issue for the global strategy of ICOS. Therefore, the ICOS approach is to avoid to create useless, not useless, but inutile own protocol when satisfactory and robust protocol exists. For example, this is the case for the meteorological measurement. ICOS will mostly adopt the WMO protocols. For gas concentration, they are really the people making the state of the art, but with the NOAA and also the WMO Go program, they also take this protocol from that, or they are very comparable and interoperable with that. For ICOS ecosystem component, because the long list of variables, the protocol design is basically a great concern and a great challenge, because there are no standard protocols that have been seen before for a lot of variables that will be measured by ICOS ecosystem station. In particular for the ancillary data measurement, because for flux measurement, let's say ICOS is the state of the art, because they are really the state of the art scientists for how you measure flux and whatever, so they obviously design their own protocol. But for other things, like all the ancillary variables, which are the driver of the flux and are include, for example, like Lie or biomass estimate, all of the soil variables, there are no really consistent, robust protocol at global scale to be adopted. So this is really a challenge that is now in the table for ICOS. So when I say a protocol of ICOS, I say that for me it included, and for ICOS it should include hardware and instrument specification, and also a detailed measurement setup and guidelines. How many sensors you have to put, at which height, if you made a profile, depending on the vegetation system. All of this is complex in ecosystem because the number of variables is very high, and because the heterogeneity of the ecosystem. It has been mentioned before that maybe all the protocol, for example, at the beginning we tried to adopt the protocol of Ameriflux, but Ameriflux describes protocol mostly for forest. For example, for Lie, you go with Lie 2000, and after they give 2 examples with for soya plantation and maize plantation, but when you go to Mahalas or shrubland, this stuff doesn't work at all. So this is really a great challenge for ICOS, and ICOS will try to do it best.
5 minutes.
Perfect. So for the ICOS ecosystem component, because the link with Eurospec is mostly with this component, this community I have a clear message to say that ICOS ecosystem component community main objective, main focus and know-how is just flux monitoring, CO2, methane and so on, but it's definitively not spectral measurement. And ICOS ecosystem focus, I mean in terms of products, is the GH flux and their main driver that will feed the models. So spectral measurement are of potential interest, and there is some synergies that are seen by ICOS, but the ICOS ecosystem community, when we talk about in this meeting about integrating spectral measurement, half of the people react saying we should not care about that. We have an infrastructure, and if ESA or whoever is interested, we are available to backup, but we should not take care of that because we are not specialists in that. So if you want to take profit of ICOS, I think the initiative must come from outside, and not it will not come from ICOS. ICOS has not really a need for that, and so some people like Dario, for example, Papali, which is a little bit the leader of the ecosystem thematic center or future, see also potential interest and synergy. So there are people open, but there are also people which are critical to integrate that. But if there is a good recommendation, I think it will be integrated. Then the initial, the status now is that the initial, let's say, the time zero of ICOS operational phase, because after a variable list or method can be revised, but with these 3 years of change, is to be finalized basically currently. I mean, there will be very little change in the list of variables. The initial protocol are to be written. Working group have been formed recently. This working group must go in the direction of a protocol. If they don't go in the direction of the protocol on December 2012, then the thematic center will write a protocol, taking information from literature, from whatever, but we need a protocol to start in 2014. So this thing is going to be finalized, either in the best way, either in a way that is not convenient, but not convenient, it will be fine. But sometimes we can form working group which have the expertise. Sometimes maybe it will be not so expert, but we need the protocols. There are also strong links I wanted to mention with NEON, which is a kind of equivalent, not to ICOS, but to ICOS ecosystem part in USA, which is National Ecosystem Observatory Network, to have common and interoperable protocol as much as possible, from the taking measurement to flux calculation. It's very important because NEON and ICOS are really the state of the art of flux measurement. All of the good scientists are connected with the top scientists in that sense. So the strategy of NEON, I don't know, because NEON is quite different because it's a fully top-down project, also in paying. Because the strategy of ICOS is that every country pays a station, and after there is something centralized. So you cannot decide some things that have been decided. I think that is foreseen for NEON, for example. They have global strategies that will be a special team dedicated to hyperspectral measurements that will have regular flight plans over the sites. Who is going to pay that in ICOS? So ICOS, it's top down for protocols, but since the funding is bottom up, so it has some consideration. And also NEON is not exactly equal in terms of goal because they also monitor biodiversity and so on. So it's like ecosystem ICOS station plus some other observation. So currently the variable site and level has been revised 1 month ago. The spectral reflectance currently appear spectrometer, which doesn't mean nothing. For the rest, okay, we have, depending on your level 1 or level 2, and here you can see that the spectral reflectance are still in the to be defined, let's say, the fate of this measurement in ICOS is not decided yet. For example, here you can see 2 other, but shortwave incoming radiation because it is discussed whether it is really relevant for us or not, and the power PFD below canopy is mostly because there is some discussion on the protocol whether you should measure above and below, but also above and what is reflected below and some detail of the methodology, but it will be a variable. Whether for spectral reference, the real status is that it depends, so the link with existing network and cost action, recommendation requested. So it's really pending on a recommendation, but a recommendation that fits with the ICOS protocol requirement, which means from the variable definition, because it's easy when you say temperature of air, it's okay, but spectral reflectance, what does it mean? From where to where? With which band resolution? So I think for me, from my perspective, it is the first thing that should be defined by the Eurospec people. What are the exact variable definition? You cannot stay and say to ICOS, please measure spectral reflectance. Or with Unispec from 300 to 800, or with whatever. This is not the strategy. At this point, we are here. The reality is we are here. So I think Eurospec, there is no hurry to meet this first deadline, but I think for this first deadline, at least the definition of variable will be nice. Even if not instrumentation, recommendation, but at least to define the variable. ICOS should measure from year to year because the relevant, interesting stuff, and maybe in the band of for fluorometer in another range with different sensitivity or whatever. So to conclude, the general consideration to wanted to make is I think that ICOS ecosystem site network, as it is foreseen, as it will probably exist, I don't know how it will cover Europe because it could be that it starts from, let's say, the wealthy country, which are more or less in the north in Europe. Is likely to be, for me, the most relevant platform for in situ validation and calibration of remote sensing products oriented to carbon cycle. Not all the remote sensing products, but the one oriented to carbon cycle. And the reason are because this station measure carbon and water flux. Who else do it at the scale, relevant scale? Also that the spatial scale fit, as it has been told by Agustin Lobo, that between flux tower and the remote sensing products. Also because of the specificity and the requirements of the eddy covariance methodology, the site characteristics are generally very good for direct comparison because they are homogeneous over relatively important spatial scale from 100 meters to kilometers. In terms of vegetation, of structures that allow direct comparison. And also because I will provide long-term theory, including from before you start to implement your stuff, for example, if you want to work with long-term remote sensing products. And also I think there is a significant overlap in the variable of interest. I mean, all of the metrical variable, you need it when you have validation, the soil condition are interested, the radiation, all of this is already monitored with quite a high quality standard by ICOS network. And also because of the European research strategies that requires more and more synergy and integration between the different components. That's all.
Thank you, Arnaud, for the presentation. We have time only for one question. Do you have question? Okay. Yes, please.
The requirements and procedures for new towers to be included in ICOS?
For a new tower to be included in ICOS, it's just to respect all the protocol and guideline of measurement of ICOS. Practically, it will work that one day you say, okay, I want to be ICOS station, and I am measuring everything. Everything is operating, and so then they put you kind of, okay, you are a candidate, and you need to submit data during a whole year, and after they will evaluate if the data quality is coherent with the standards.
And then there is a central facility in order to distribute the data.
Yeah, the data, how they deal with data is quite complex because it will go through the Carbon portal, but where are going to remain the data if it's a competence of thematic centers? The competence between the Carbon portal and the thematic center are not well defined, but a key point is that, of course, because of all of this new European Commission, I don't remember the name, but you need to have open free access data policy.
Yeah, but this is very good, but for the individual stations, sometimes this is a problem because it requires an infrastructure. So my question is whether ICOS is actually helping on that by just providing this distribution, this availability. Because distributing the data is very complicated for the...
What do you mean, distributing the data to?
To the public in general. I mean, to anybody to any researcher who is interested on the data.
Yeah, but currently it will work basically like if you go to, for example, to Carbono Europe portal and the database of the one that I know better, ecosystem database, you can see what data are available, you can make a request, and then the request up to now go to PI. But for example, for Carbono Europe, all the data of Carbono Europe are free of access now because it's 5 years, 2 years after the project because of European considerations. They are free. You go there, you just ask to download this year. There is the description of variables. It's quite easy process.
No, I understand that. But my question is that for the institutions operating the towers, for example, one thing is to maintain the tower itself and the quality of the data, etc. And another thing that is also complicated is to take care of the distribution of this data. So if all the requests go to the PI, etc., this is this is a lot of work dealing with that data distribution. So my question is whether ICOS is ready to actually take care of the data distribution of everyone.
Yeah, of course. It will be the portal to have access to ICOS data. It will not be any individual. It is an integrated stuff, so it will be like this, yeah. From a central place, I take care, and they will register, and you have precise detail on who have downloaded your data or whatever. But there will be also, there is a big theme on traceability also. So there are, for example, the data query object identifier, or they are thinking about different options also, but the traceability of the data, the distribution will ensure by ICOS in a very efficient and easy way, because it's also a key issue.
With the Carbo Europe system, it's quite easy. Like for the PIs, you just get an email that somebody is interested in your data, and you need just to click yes or no.